So I was going to talk about the Soviet Union, but apparently this is going to be about the entire history of music. Just you wait to see why that is. Now many countries are what could be called secular countries, meaning they rely on religion, their government is formed upon the Bible and faith. For example, England and America, these places where religion is still powerful and persuades those in control. Of course, these places aren't as secular as they used to be, but that isn't a bad thing. To separate faith from government would, in my opinion, only have benefits for these countries. Anyway, things were a little different when the Soviet Union was founded. The church has always had a lot of power. Priests were seen as connections to God, and if you're second to the guy who rules the world, then you're bound to get attention. Most of the early English monarchy was in consistent liaison with the church. And also, with the amount of money put into the church, not just by the state but by the public, these guys had and still have a lot of money. And some of them use that money on dirty things. Money equals power. The church was the biggest powerhouse in the whole of the world. So you can kind of see why Stalin wasn't too impressed with them being around. Money equals power, God equals power, the massive following equals power, and power equals enemies, and enemies equal an uprising, and Stalin did not want an uprising. So in comes state atheism! Everybody has to be an atheist, or else you're murdered. If you were seen worshipping any kind of god, you would be killed or at least ridiculed. In most cases you would be sent to Siberia to never come back. Of course, the same could be said to other rule breakers, such as composers who didn't write Russian enough music, or music about anti-political views, and also about anyone who disregarded the government in general. Did something Stalin didn't like? Ha! Dead. But we're going to focus on the religion part, because music and religion began in this weird-ass world as one and the same, and to take half of it away caused some issues. In the early days, music was seen as sacred. Only those in the church were allowed to compose and make music. Of course, there were rebels outside who did their own thing, and they founded folk music. In some ways, I'm glad the two never mixed. Music was reserved for those who could afford the glory of God, and could afford to pay these higher men for their services. And as the sacredness faded, this continued. In order to access early classical music, you had to be of high standing in society, which usually meant you were part of the church. And so, religious music would be commissioned, and when it wasn't, it was still being written, because music was still supposedly a divine power that connected the composers to God. Bach, in particular, was very religious. Even when the music became more about emotions and stories and personality than religion and faith, it was always there, and the most played pieces of earlier music are often the most religious ones. If you think about it, the whole of Western classical culture is based on Bach, who in turn was ruled by religion, so therefore classical music is secular. So you can see why the removal of religion may be a problem. We have two important composers coming into their prime during state atheism. From Russia, Alfred Schnittke, and from Estonia, Arvo Pärt. Both of them brought up by religious families, both of them suddenly stripped of faith, both of them finding this only made them have more faith. And so Schnittke goes straight for the jugular and writes an obviously religious piece of music. Russia isn't happy, his music becomes banned, they try to kill him, he flees to France. Meanwhile, Pärt premieres this new work and everyone's so excited about this avant-garde, totally not religious work. Oh, would you look at that, it's a credo with reference to Bach and Handel inside. His music gets banned, they try to kill him, he flees to Germany. Germany at this point is like, lol, we have an Estonian, fuck you, France. And France is like, look at all the hits we give, and waves their Russians in the air, and Germany's like, just you wait. But the most surprising thing about Schnittke and Pärt's synchronized lives is that they both founded polystylism without even knowing each other, because the temptation of quoting the very religious Western classical canon was just too tempting for these two rebels. And so, amongst the sanctuary of Europe's angriest siblings, started the religious retrograde, the revival of religious classical choral music, with some of the most beautiful pieces the world has ever seen, Schnittke starting a new age of Russian classical, and Pärt embracing minimalism. And anyway, I'm going to stop talking about religion before my skin sets on fire and somebody tries to convert me.